Welcome to Season 3 of Rewrite the Rules, a show about stories of women leaders in Asia, women who are rewriting the rules of life, career, and relationships. In today's podcast of Season 3, we bring to you a guest who's someone I personally admire a lot, is someone who's leading the way for women leaders, especially in tech, and is someone who does not need an introduction. So today's guest, I'm delighted to welcome Sandhya Devanathan, Vice President and Head of Meta India. Welcome to the show, Sandhya.
Thanks so much for having me, Ritu. And that was a very generous introduction. I'm delighted to be here.
Great. So let's get started. How did you make the switch, or what drove you to make the switch from banking to tech? And I know you spent about 16 years in banking, from there to tech.
I definitely thought I'd be one of those people that would end up, with a 25-year, when you cross the 25-year mark in banking, at Citi at least, we used to get a watch. But the shift actually from banking to tech was in large part prompted by my husband, actually, because I saw the amount of fun he was having. He was at Uber at that point. They were growing exponentially in Asia. They were a small team. They were making all these investments. Consumer behavior was changing because people were getting mobile revolution. It just pretty much started in a big way in terms of smartphone revolution. And I saw the potential that it could have for our emerging markets in Southeast Asia. So when Meta called at that time Facebook with the role that they had, and they asked whether I'd be interested in interviewing for it, I sort of jumped all in. I didn't know whether I'd be a great fit for that role,
right,
but I definitely was very interested. By then, I'd spent 15 years in banking, and I'd seen the shift that banking had made, and I'd become I was a managing director by then.
Right.
So I was a little more disconnected with what was happening directly in terms of product launches, stuff like that. It was more my teams that did it. So I think in a way, it was also getting back to roots and learning something new.
Right. So what's been the biggest shift or change that you saw between banking and tech? Are there any?
I think the biggest shift, obviously, at that time when I made the shift from banking to Facebook then was the shift in just the industry, right? Like in terms of banking is a very established, was going through a period of pretty tough regulatory change, but an established industry, more traditional, if you'll call it that. Whereas, Facebook, when I joined from a company that was 70, 80,000 employees to Facebook at that time was only 10,000, right? One, hierarchies didn't matter so much in a fast-moving tech startup. Two, I think just in terms of hustle and what you learned, I think I felt like I was back to being a student again, and I had to learn a lot. I knew banking well. I didn't know tech super well. And I had to unlearn a lot of behaviors because I would sign a lot of docs, sit in a lot of committees, whereas this was much more fast-moving and different. Nice. So I had to unlearn a lot. Yeah. But at the same time, over a period of time, I began to appreciate all the experience and the skills that I had picked up in banking because they stood me in good stead. So I would say to anybody sort of making a shift, understand the differences in the sectors, but also don't discount, your knowledge and your skills because you pick that up over a period of time. And there's value to that.
That's right. It's basically skill stacking. Whatever you learned, you just stack it on top. It's not like it's gone wasted, right?
And I don't think I was good at that in the beginning because I really felt like I'd made this huge shift. I think I was walking around with an imposter syndrome most of the time. But then I realized, oh my God, what I've learned is valuable. Yeah. And that stood me in good stead over a period of time at Meta.
You're one of the few women who are leading the pack in the tech sector. How has it been for you?
I'll start with my company first, right? Meta. I think maybe 6 months in, I got invited to the APAC leadership meeting. I was a guest. I went in and I was amazed that there were so many women in the room because when I was in banking, I think I was a very small percentage of women managing directors. Whereas, moving to Meta, I think one of the things that I felt was this less of a tax I needed to pay as a woman because there were just other women who were in, leadership roles like you and I sitting across a table, having a conversation, making decisions. So I think for me, it was just quite refreshing to be in a company that had that kind of representation even as we were growing rapidly.
What are one or two things you think we as women can do more of?
I think there was some stat that said only 1% of all Southeast Asia companies that receive funding, only 1% of that funding goes to women founders. If you see what's happening in the entrepreneurial sector, I think there's definitely a lot more participation we could see from women founders and funding going to women founders, right? So that I think is something that we should continue to spotlight. And what you're doing with this podcast, talking to women leaders, helps every little bit in terms of, focusing on women, the work that they're doing, I think makes a big difference. What we can do, I'll tell you, these are practical things that I do.
Yes.
So, for example, I get called to be on boards. I have a list of women that want to be on boards that have given me their bios. So, and I can't be on, multiple boards.
Right.
So I just rattle off from that list. I say, okay, if you're looking for this kind of skill set or this,
Very nice.
this industry, probably this person's a good fit. I do that with roles. Like if somebody calls me for a job and I'm not interested, I've been at Meta now for 8.5 years and hopefully much longer. But I do take that call and I say that these 3 amazing women that I think you should speak to. I was just talking again to my husband earlier today, and one of the things we talked about was who else can we get on your podcast. And I have a list of some amazing women that I think you'd love chatting with. So I think those are ways in which we can spotlight, we can support, we can sponsor in our companies. So there's a lot of we can mentor. So there's ways in which we can do it, and I think based on the amount of time and capacity one has, you can figure out. The other thing I was just thinking was, don't beat yourself up. In whichever capacity you can help, be that voice of change and be that voice of support.
Right. Great points. I think 2 things you said. You talked about allyship, and I think that's so important, women supporting women. And the second point that you made is that don't think of, you only have to change the entire world. Like even if you help one person or whatever capacity, I think that's key. Sometimes women think, oh, what will this little act do? Or I'm not going to make I'll just make a dent in the big thing, but doesn't matter. Like every small action matters. I want to ask you, Sandhya, in your career, have you had mentors?
I think lots of people know now that mentors are, you go to them for advice, you bounce ideas of them, they have your best interests at heart, but they may or may not be able to influence your career. Sponsors are people that talk about you and have that influence over your career in rooms that you're not in, right? And I think I've been lucky to have both. I think I've had sponsors at Meta, I've been lucky enough to have people who've sponsored my career.
Right.
People who took a bet and said, here's someone, 15 years in banking, never worked in tech. Let's give her this other role to try out, right? So I think I've been lucky enough to to have had multiple different roles, each one, with expanded scope and responsibility over a fairly short period of time that I've been at Meta. And that's all come because I've had, sponsors who vouch for me, but equally mentors who've guided me, right? This could be when I was thinking about India. And one of the things that I was really excited about the opportunity to go back home and work there, and just given, the amazing change that's happening in India now and, how well poised we are for the future, I thought this would be a terrific opportunity for me to be in a company as consequential as Meta in India, right? And be a part of that change. But it also meant that personally, my son's, in 10th, going to 11th grade, he couldn't make that move. And so my husband and I had to take this tough call on we will live apart as a family to do. And again, while we took that decision as a family, I think, again, talking to mentors really helped me sort of crystallize why I was doing this and why this was important to me, but also how I would make it work for my family.
Good. It sounds it's all working out well for you. I do want to talk about challenges because, I know you are where you are and it sounds all nice, but I'm sure it didn't come without its due share of challenges.
I mean, look, none of this is easy. So if that's the impression I'm giving, no. I do think there's been more than a fair set of challenges that have come my way, as it is for all of us in our careers. So I love making plans. I would make that plan early on in my career, only to find that each time plans would change. So I remember, again, my sister overnight ended up, in a really serious accident in the US, and was left paralyzed waist down. And that meant, like, we made plans, my husband and I as a family, to sort of think about that we'd be going back home to India after our stint in the Philippines. But what ended up happening was we ended up moving to the US to be with my sister as she recuperated, because she was out almost for a year and she had to undergo extensive rehab. It was a pretty difficult move and it was a challenging time for the family. And I think lots of us have career aspirations, professional plans that sometimes go completely awry because, we've not seen something happen that could, it could be a good thing or a bad thing, but, there are challenges that come your way. The other bit that I would say is, once we were in the US, that's pretty much when the great financial crisis started. And a year into our stint in the US, we found out that we were pregnant. And that was when layoffs were happening, in full flow. We were at Citi then, and every day I'd see somebody walking out with a box. And for me, that was it was terrifying. I know now, at that point, I think that was the first that I had seen. I'd come from India where it was employment for life, right? And then on top of that, we were pregnant, and my kid was born there, but really tiny, and we was watching all of this happen, and we were immigrants. Again, our plans of staying there for a while and all of that, we had to recalibrate. We were like, do we want to be in this period of indecision? And Amit, my husband, wanted to start a business then. So we actually used it as an opportunity to say, what does the next 5 years look like for us? And that's when we decided that we'd move back to Asia. We always joke, we lasted the great financial crisis, baby in tow, and then decided after all of that to move back to Asia. So I would say there were a ton of challenges. There were other challenges. When I made MD, managing director, for the first time, I was fairly young at Stanchart at that point. And that was the first time I think I faced pretty overt, jibes around, my ambition, around, toning it down in terms of how ambitious you are. And I think for me, it was quite hurtful. And I let it affect me more than it should have. And those are all things that I think people experience, but maybe women more so.
Women more so.
And I think as you get older, you get more prepared to handle it.
Yes.
But early on in your career, it can be quite debilitating.
Yeah. No, thank you so much, Sandhya, because, thanks for sharing even personal challenges, because a lot of time we don't see that, right? We only see a person successful and you don't see all those things behind. So thanks for sharing that. And secondly, also the point you made about, getting feedback as a woman leader, and especially when you're young, you're very ambitious, you're outspoken. There's always like a double bind. You do too much, you're very aggressive, you don't say anything, you're not visible, right? So I'm happy that you talked about it, because a lot of our listeners are emerging women leaders, and they need to hear this, that you will go through it. You get better at dealing with it.
Yeah, just build a little bit of a thick skin. Don't take not all feedback is relevant.
Correct. I want to talk a little bit more about what is, you talked about when you move from banking to tech, the continuous learning, unlearning. How do you, as a leader today, invest in your personal growth?
So I do think that my role itself gives me a ton of opportunity for growth, right? Because I'm always learning something new.
Yeah.
And when you're in a company like Meta, there's, we've just made this, we've always invested in AI, but you've seen this big shift that we made to AR, VR. We're using it across our family of apps and in our products. And for me, a lot of the learning has, in the past 8.5 years, if I were to look back, I don't think any day's been the same. And I think, hand on heart, I can say pretty much every day I've learned something new. But I do think there's been a couple of other things that one of the things I don't think I did well was find time to unwind. I still think I'm pretty bad at it. But with my son, so early on at Meta, we used to have this thing called, write your vision for the year. We can still do it. Basically, you write your vision for what you'd like your year to look like, but you write it in past tense.
Okay.
So think of it as we're sitting in December 2024 and we're looking at the year gone past. And in one of those, I wrote that I wanted to bond a little more with my child, who was very young then. And he loved pottery. He had done some trial class or whatever, and he wanted to do it. And I said, wouldn't it be great if, like, so at the end of the year, I wrote my son and I have done many pottery lessons together, right? The funny thing is when you actually write your intention down, apparently there's some stat which says 60%, probability or whatever that that'll actually happen. But it did. So I ended up signing up for pottery with my son. He did all of maybe 3 lessons and then he bailed. But I ended up, pursuing that. And it was for me a creative outlet. The other thing I would say is, and I think I wanted to mention this earlier, in all our roles and the jobs that we do, I think we have the opportunity to drive impact. So when I was at Standard Chartered, I partnered with UN Women and we launched this. Back then it was UN Women, now it's United Women. We launched the first ever STEM program for girls because we saw that there weren't enough girls pursuing STEM as a career in Singapore. And now it's called Girls to Pioneers. It's a big program. Similarly, at Meta, I'm lucky enough to partner with lots of amazing, partners, sometimes with the government, on skilling programs we've launched, on things we've done around getting more women entrepreneurs, around work we've done with VCs. So I do think there's, those moments within your, like there are opportunities within your company where you can also grow by figuring out how you support the community. Because that's a different growth. It's not like work growth. It doesn't reflect in your performance appraisal. It's not all of that, but it's ways in which you can partner across the ecosystem and do something that's pretty transformational.
That's right. I love the fact that you said about making an impact. Because again, when people think of impact, they think about changing the world kind of impact. But, all of us have the capacity to make that impact in whatever form we want. I want to ask you a few questions. A little bit of rapid fire, so to say. What's a question you get asked the most?
How did you shift from banking to tech?
Oh,
maybe?
okay.
Or I think close second is how do you balance work and life?
Okay. What's an advice you give often when people ask you for advice?
Don't let your past, hold you back, because I think things happen, but you can always chart your future, and don't take no for an answer.
It's a good one. Okay. What's been the highlight of your career?
Maybe the best is yet to come.
Ooh, love that. Okay. What else if it was not this?
I've just so literally moved. It's been a year and a half. So I don't know, maybe, 10, 15 years from now, I do see myself as potentially coaching younger women, as they embark on their leadership journeys.
Yeah, perfect. You and me should stay connected then. What's your leadership style?
So I would say one, definitely empowering, because I do think as you get more senior, or even as you take on more, and at every step of your leadership journey, you have to figure out what is it that you unlearn, what is it that you learn, and how do you get more scope and bandwidth as a leader. And one of the ways you do that is, one, having a great team, but 2, empowering that team to go out and do their best work. The second thing I would say is it's really important to think about why teams are doing what they're doing. Why are we all so rallying the whole org towards a larger vision on what we want to deliver? So what are we doing at Meta in India? What would success look like for us? What is it that unites all of us across the country in the team, across multiple teams, is again something that I think I spend my time on and invest on. The last bit I would say is just connectedness and authenticity. So I think it's really important for me, at least personally. I think somebody said this, you can only be you, everyone else is already taken.
Yeah.
And that served me well. Every time I think I've tried to be someone else, I've failed pretty miserably. So over a period of time, I've gotten comfortable with my leadership style, with my, being authentic, and, using that to actually connect with my team. So I think forging that sort of spirit of connection within teams and being authentic while you do that is also really important to me.
Yeah. Okay, great. Yes, being comfortable in your own skin, I think that's a skill in itself. Yeah. Is there anything you could change looking back?
Maybe I'd have taken a few bolder bets earlier. I suffer from imposter syndrome all the time. So I think, there were opportunities that came my way early on, but I just felt like I was not ready for it. I'd have probably been a little bolder in my career and probably cared less about failure.
Yeah, yeah. One question I have is, what would you advise your 21-year-old?
Take bets on your career. You never know where you'd go, and trust yourself, right? And even if you fall, you'll be able to pick yourself up. I think just that confidence of knowing that things are not as bad as they seem, or things are not as risky as they're made out to be, like that you can take bets on your career is one. The second thing I'd probably tell myself is have a little bit of fun along the way. More fun. The only thing that enables you to have a really long career and run that marathon is having that balance with your personal life, whatever that looks like for people, right?
Absolutely.
Whether it's hobbies they pursue, whether it's their family that they're close to, whether it's friends they're connecting with. And I do think that becomes really important. The third bit that I'm realizing is as you get older, health becomes also pretty top of mind, right? So figuring out how you keep running the long marathon, but make sure that you're also taking care of the other aspects of your life.
I'm glad there are a lot of 21-year-olds listening to this, but I think that's a great point you made about balance. Through the podcast and through the book, which is coming out, we talk a lot about balance. In the book is the same thing that, it's career and your personal life don't have to be mutually exclusive. They have to be integrated to make it sustainable. So I'm glad you talked about that.
Yeah, I think for me, the inflection point when I had my son, we were in the US. Childcare was expensive. People were getting laid off all around us. It's a very uncertain time. And I think the bit that I'm glad that we made work as a family was that, we kept working. So I didn't sort of quit at that point because it's hardest when they're youngest.
Yes.
And I think my son also values the fact that, I work now. So for people who it's not the right answer for everyone,
sure.
Right? But whatever the right answer is for you, and if you feel like, pursuing a career, staying, being in the workspace is important for you, don't give up.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Sandhya. I took away so much from our conversation. And, as you could see, we could go on and on. But really, thanks for sharing not only your professional journey, but also personal journey. I'm sure listeners are going to get a lot of good stuff from here. Thank you so much and all the best.
Thanks again, Ritu. Thanks so much for having me. I really enjoyed our chat.